Welcome to the Writer Groupie podcast. I'm Kim Smith, the writing guru, bringing you discussions, insights, and insider details on planning, producing, promoting, and profiting as a writer. This is a podcast by writers for writers. You can find out more about Writer Groupie at www.kimsmithauthor.com. And here's the next episode of Writer Groupie.
Okay.
And here we are with another episode of Writer Groupie. And tonight my guest is Toph Eklund. And Toph, I just want to say thanks for coming on the show. I'm excited about our interview. Can you just jump right in here and tell us a little bit about you and about your book and the writing life?
Okay. So, well, by day, I'm an instructor. I teach, actually, creative writing and game design. And my entire life is shaped in non-trivial ways, both by the fact that I'm genderqueer. That's a form of transgender identity. If you can, try to use they pronouns rather than he or she for me. If you mess up, don't worry about it. But,
okay.
It's a very difficult thing for most people at first, so no worries. And also by being a parent. I have, in addition to my lovely wife, we have a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old at home, and that has been, not only has that influenced who I am as a writer and of course as a person, it's also had a huge impact on when and how I write.
I bet. As it does for everyone who has children. I'm telling you, I've been there, done that, and got the t-shirt.
And, for many people, writing either is something that they do, not when their children are young, or they are in a place in their relationship where the other person provides the overwhelming majority of care. And I am very fortunate to have the love and support of. I'm sorry, did I cut out there for a moment?
Yes, you did, just very briefly.
Okay. I'm very fortunate to have the love and support of my spouse, Nikki, and she is the primary caregiver in our household, but I also have always wanted to be an involved parent, so the juggling act is tricky.
Yeah.
I originally wrote Autumn Harvest as a serial, and it was serialized through Big World Network, who is also the publisher of the book, and without those kind of persistent small deadlines and the dividing of the entire project into clearly manageable chunks, I don't know if I would have written it. I don't know if I'd have been able to at this point.
Yeah.
Because, every writer should have. You always want to have a regular discipline of writing. But when you've got a very, very busy life, including a very full home life, it's hard. And so for me, serialization was a way to prioritize my writing enough to get it done, so that then when when the kids were asleep and I was tired, I'd go, okay, you know what? I've got another deadline to meet. I'm going to write. And it helped me sharpen my own, resolution in general as a writer. The idea for Autumn Harvest, actually, I've had, for many years now. The seed of it began when Nikki and I were looking at having children, because part of the story is a story about pregnancy under difficult conditions. And my spouse has a connective tissue disorder that is undiagnosed because it doesn't meet the criteria of any of the known connective tissue disorders.
Wow.
They're all pretty rare. Marfan's is the most common one. And the good news is that part of why she's not Marfan's is that she doesn't have the severity of symptoms that would be required to be Marfan's.
Oh man, that just doesn't sound fair. It's kind of like a crack there, and she just gets to slip right through, and that's terrible.
Yeah, it was very scary for me and difficult for me to be, because I wanted to be the most supportive spouse possible, but thinking about pregnancy is high risk for people with Marfan's. And after a series of doctor's appointments, it was determined that she did not have the specific high risk factors, particularly risk of what they call aortal dissection.
Oh boy. Ew.
Yeah, that's what that is a leading cause of death among people with Marfan's.
Yeah.
But she had a completely clear echocardiogram. So.
Well, that's good though. Take your blessings where you find them.
But and so going into this and with her wanting a midwife assisted birth, I had these lingering doubts and reservations and outright fear, and part of that got channeled into this story where there is a pregnancy and a birth under supernatural threat. Part of the story of Autumn Harvest Maiden. It's not a spoiler because I made sure to open on the first page with this before we flash back, is that our protagonist spends about half the story pregnant.
Oh.
And I wanted to tell the best honest story I could, being among other things that I've never been and cannot become pregnant, a story where pregnancy didn't exclude the character from being effective, didn't make her passive or a victim, and in which, among other things, pregnancy as part of human sexuality was represented. I have this whole laundry list of things that I didn't see enough of in stories that I wanted to see. I wanted to see more characters of color. I wanted to see a wider range of body types, especially in sexy stories. And so these things kind of came together into this original short story that then, when I was desperately needing a creative project after we had Soren, our first child, I was like, this story isn't finished. I want to flesh this out and finish it. And I saw an opportunity to do it as a serial, and I was like, okay, I can commit to this. I already have some idea where this is going. I've got, I don't know, at that point it might have been 30 pages or so of seed material, and I got to write this epic fantasy romance about a relatively heavy-set woman of color who meets a younger disabled man after she saves his life, and he's the crown prince of a kingdom that doesn't want much to do with women, let alone witches. And I like to think that I'm challenging some of the cliches of fantasy with what I wrote, and at the same time delivering a story that even if someone doesn't see any of those things as challenges to convention, that they just enjoy the story.
Right. And, honestly, I'm one of those people who believe that a good story is a good story is a good story. If you have engaging characters, you have interesting settings, and you have a plot that moves, you're going to find a readership.
Right.
So, well, tell us some of the challenges you've faced being, a parent and having a job. I mean, we've got aspiring writers out there, and we all come from the same basic foundation,
Right.
Trying to write a book or a story and having all these other things pulling on us all the time. How did you manage all that?
Well, I think that I knew where I was right then, that I needed some external impetus to set deadlines. And you don't have to be writing in serial format, and you don't have to have an editor you're responsible to set deadlines. But it really, really helps if you're not the only one trying to keep yourself on task. This is one of those places where a writer's circle can be incredibly valuable, or even just a single good friend, especially if they're working on a writing project as well. It's the same principle as exercise. If you have an exercise buddy, you'll each be encouraging each other, and you may be going, oh, I don't want to go jogging this morning or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then your buddy's there and saying, okay, I didn't want to get up, but you know what? I did, and I'm at your door and you're 15 minutes late.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's now if you're one of those people who has no trouble, just setting deadlines, you've been living with your 5, 10, 15, and 20-year plans and hit every tick box when you intended to, then obviously this doesn't apply to you. But I don't think most of us I think find procrastination to be easier.
I know I do. I'm being honest.
and I think that the best way to counter that is with clear deadlines, and for most of us, having a social component to those deadlines really helps.
That's really good advice. I like that advice. And so many people, the next question they ask is, well, I agree, but where can I find a group of writers?
And, there are some amazing groups online. We live in an age that offers connections of a sort that just did not exist before. I think that actually, for many people, having a group you can go to can be in the flesh, in person, can be desirable, and that's where things like meetups can be really helpful. And going to a meetup of people who are writers, getting a feel for them, see if you want to try. And professional writing societies can be immensely helpful. For one thing, whether it's the Romance Writers of America or any of the other groups.
And they meet once a month generally, but if you have an online group, you could probably meet up a lot more often.
And you don't have to pick. Unless, of course, you are living, say, in, depending in terms of your ability to travel, if you're living in a relatively remote region, you might not have a group you can reasonably go to on a monthly or more often basis. But whether you do or not, having people you're checking up with at least every week is hugely helpful. And, if you have, there are Facebook groups, there are people, I'm connected with a lot of writers over Twitter, and I'll tell you, I stay much more in touch with the ones who, are sharing about their travails as writers than with the ones who are only posting about their book, whether it's new or not so new anymore. When it comes to all the social media, I think a good guideline, something I heard that I think is spot on, well, maybe not spot on, but at least the right ballpark, is at least 90% of what you post should be stuff that is of interest and helps keep people feeling like you are adding something to their lives.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear somebody else say that. I think it all the time. Because there's so many people out there and all they're saying is buy my book, buy my book, buy my book. And I've gotten very selective now. And when I'm on Twitter, if I go to your Twitter page and all it has is these mini ads for your book, I'm not following you.
Yeah. And I think Twitter is particularly difficult because it's so ephemeral. Technically those tweets live on forever, but for the most part, if you don't see it within a couple hours of it being made, or at absolute most, within a day, you're never going to see it. But I think with Twitter, therefore, it's all the more important that you are connecting and maintaining the connections you have when you're on there. And the same thing's true for Facebook or Tumblr, especially people who are both writers and artists. Tumblr is a great place to be.
Yeah.
And if you are, among other things, if you are a writer in some professional capacity, like if you do copywriting or if you do technical writing, then LinkedIn might be one of the best places for you then, because then you can market yourself in your kind of day job hat and be making connections in terms of some of the more creative writing, be it fiction or creative nonfiction or whatever.
I have not figured out LinkedIn yet. I know I'm there and I've got a profile filled out and I've got a slew of people that I'm fanning, following, friending, whatever you call it on LinkedIn. But I have not really been actively using that to my advantage, I'm quite certain. You know more about it than I do? Because I'd like to hear.
Well, I think LinkedIn as a platform is struggling to find itself. And recently they purchased educational video platform Lynda. And I'll be honest, when I think of social networks, I tend to think of Twitter for breadth of connection, Facebook for depth, Tumblr I'm relatively new to, but just finding it to be a lot of fun, actually.
I get lost in it. It's almost like a rabbit hole. It's like Pinterest to me because there's always great pictures and videos.
Pinterest is another fun one.
It is.
and LinkedIn almost seems like a matter of duty. It's like someone I know comes on LinkedIn, I feel obligated to like them and then to click like on a bunch of the skills that they have. And
I know what you're saying. It's kind of like a scratch your back, scratch mine scenario. And if you don't reciprocate, you feel guilty.
Yeah. But I feel like, I guess I'd have to say that I think LinkedIn does have some potential, but that it still is not overall the best place for writers. I think you can not feel too bad about having put more of your attention elsewhere.
Yeah, well, that's a comfort because I really have. Sorry, LinkedIn fans. I mean, if you want to send me some mail telling me a better way to use it, I'll be happy to listen to it. But
I'll read that as well.
Yeah, really, I'll share it.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I know listeners and readers and fans and followers want to know more about being a writer who is genderqueer.
So that's, so genderqueer is one of those terms people sometimes have this ambivalent reaction to, mainly because for a long time the word queer was used almost exclusively as a slur. It's become a pretty thoroughly reclaimed word, and in particular, genderqueer was coined as a way of describing people who don't fit into the male and male-female gender binary. It is similar in meaning to, but not always the same as non-binary. Non-binary is much more specific. It's like, are you male or female? No. or perhaps both.
You're educating me because I'm dumber than dirt. I'm just telling you.
Hey, not all of us only know what we know. What matters isn't what you already know. What matters is your interest in learning. That's how you become knowledgeable.
There you go.
And so there are So when the term genderqueer is used, it's sometimes used almost purely in terms of the kind of sociology and culture of gender, what is sometimes called gender performance. If looking, for example, at the way I'm dressed right now, that's something I call that genderqueer. But it is usually also associated with being transgender, which is specifically not identifying with the gender you were assigned at birth. That is the trans-sensitive terminology. With what is for trans folk in general an open-ended and never quite completable aspiration toward being as much as possible another gender. That open-endedness is actually kind of important to me. I don't think I would have been able to fully realize why the things that were troubling me were if I had had to think about it in really fixed terms, because everyone performs their identity and their gender every day. It's in the clothes you buy and choose to wear. It's in haircuts, in use or not use of cosmetics. It's in mannerisms. It's in what you accept or don't accept from other people. And I think that we are, all of us, constantly becoming ourselves. We are shaping who we will be tomorrow a little bit every day. And that's part of why people who identify as genderqueer sometimes I've gotten this before, and are very put off by comments like, why don't you just pick one? Because that assumes that everything that people associate with gender is deterministic and fixed, when only the biology, and the biology is actually more complicated than people often want to think, including, of course, people who are intersex, and that is people who categorically, in the most conventional scientific terms, have physiological traits of both sexes. And some of those people are genderqueer, some of those people are transgender, some of those people are not. They're intersex, but they don't identify as any gender other than their intersex gender, which sometimes is a problem because, again, there are people who want to see them as having to be male or female, and not only in terms of intrusive questions about chromosomes and genitals, but also in terms of everything those people associate with the cultural package.
I was going to say, why do we do that? Is it society? Why do we look at a human being and say they are this or that? How come they can't be whatever they want to be?
Well, and I think part of it comes out of there among things, there is some kind of scientific evidence that people form in groups and out groups of people. That happens to a degree at a very low level at a very early age, and it's about identifying where you're safe. This is part of how people, for example, can become completely unintentionally and unselfconsciously racist because they grew up only around certain people looked a certain way, and that often includes skin tone, but it doesn't have to be anywhere near that simple. And so they instinctively, it's not actually an instinct, but it's in this combination of a little bit of biology and their own life experience, feel uncomfortable when they're around other people, and they translate that into feeling that they actually are unsafe, as opposed to developing an awareness that is more based on fact. And I think with gender it is similar, that there are certain convenient reasons that have to do with the culture that is already there for us the moment we're born. And that culture has, wherever you are, there's that culture. It's going to vary in many of the details. That culture has deep roots and has changed a lot over time, but tends to seem as if it had always been the same. It keeps changing, but it always seems, if you don't look closely at the history, like it is mostly the same, with only the details changing. And there's been a lot of historical reasons to control population through reproduction. I think that, I think there are certain... Okay.
Tinkerbell's just decided she wants to be whiny tonight. I'm sorry.
To give you the short version of it, my particular version of a feminist take on it is that for a long time in under feudal systems, members of the upper classes were really concerned, and this is European, but it's not exclusively European by any measure, but particularly talking about feudalism in Europe, with inheritance, and thus ensuring they knew that you always know who the mother is, but that the child was the father's child, because then they could be sure that the wealth was staying in that same patrilineal line. You never have to worry about the matrilineal line. And many of those same societies simultaneously needed large underclasses and were afraid of those underclasses getting too large. And, without breaking it down too much, I think you see that some of the sexual taboos and some of the gender norms are about kind of, again, it's not like people set out to create this. It just kind of emerged out of people being human, and some people who had power trying to acquire more of it, and other people trying to make it through their day just by conforming to whatever allowed them to survive, where these things were accreted up, and now even we don't live in a completely fair world by any stretch of the imagination, but where people have considerable more autonomy and an ability to make their own life choices, there is so much that is already there in terms of gender that it is just unthinkable to many people. They might not find it unthinkable that a woman would be a CEO, but they do find it unthinkable that that same woman wouldn't miss being a mother. They assume that all women want to be mothers in a way they do not assume that all men want to be fathers. Or that's all right.
Okay. What I tried didn't work, so she's back.
Okay.
Say hi. I'm sorry.
So that's I could go on and on about that. We probably might as well move on to the next topic for now.
Well, my question now is, as a person who is, genderqueer,
right?
What difficulties have you had to overcome as a writer? I mean, to me, and I'm kind of thinking this simplistically, obviously, but I'm a mother, a wife.
Right.
I was a daughter. I'm a lot of different things. I'm a writer. It's like I'm a lot of different people, and I try to be accepting of the fact that people are people and they have a lot of different hats they wear, basically.
True. This is true.
And so I just want to know more about your journey and how that has worked for you or not worked for you. I'm sure there are a lot of other people listening who are thinking, okay, I could tell her a lot about my life,
Right. Well, it's there definitely are challenges because we all wear a whole range of hats. There are all these different facets to who we are, but they're all connected, of course. They're all part of the, and something that is a challenge for me is that there are some very distinct notions about what kinds of stories men and women write.
That's a good one.
And I can tell you that the barriers to men entering women's genres are lower than vice versa.
I agree.
I'm actually not currently a member of the Romance Writers Association, but there's a local RWA chapter I quite like that when I have a little more free time, will probably rejoin. And I first attended before I was out. And then I basically, though I still wasn't presenting quite as much, I did actually come out at one of those meetings. I told them about who I was. And both before and after that, I felt very welcome. To be blunt, this group that was overwhelmingly women, and I mean cisgender women, but women who've always been able to, well, okay, I don't know all the details of their lives, but as far as I could tell, have always been, been able to be, to some measure, at home in being women. And I was a welcome bit of interest. The only risk I ever faced there was of the fact that I was still going to be the closest thing to a guy in the room most of the time, but incredibly accepting. You want the opposite, you can look at some of the things that have been going on with the Hugos this year.
I admit I have not been keeping up. I'm sorry.
I won't go into detail, but as much as some of the people involved have denied that their goal was to roll back representation of women and minorities, the campaigning for these alternate slates have been both overwhelmingly authors and stories about straight white men. And many of these are actually very worthy, well-written stories. But it shows you something, and it shows you more than one thing, because some of these same people who have been nominated for Hugos as a result of this, I would consider it dubious campaigning, both by the sad puppies and the more radical so-called rabid puppies, that some of the people who've been nominated by those campaigns have actually withdrawn themselves from consideration because they didn't want to be nominated that way.
Right.
But I've been a geek and a nerd my entire life, and I have seen the mixed ways in which women have been welcomed into the overwhelmingly male and usually straight domains of the comic shop and the games and the gaming store. And it's often been with tests. You had to, the women, when they came in, had to prove that they were sufficiently part of the culture to be there. And then with either open ogling or with, in one case I can remember, some really distressing opening calling out of how the woman wasn't sexually attractive, because, and it was really distressing to me, incredibly distressing, because these were people who I would have thought, having been through mostly some adversity of their own, having been bullied for being, scrawny or into these abstruse kind of pursuits. But as can happen in any culture, we were talking about this earlier, clear lines were drawn on in-groups and out-groups, and they, insane as it is, all of womanhood was an out-group, and women were either sexual objects or had to be painted and pointed out as not sexual objects, in which case they were curiosities at best. And I find that insane, but this is something I've seen, and it certainly is something that I think about in presenting myself in the most authentic way I can. I do not worry about passing for male or female. The only time I would even think about it would be if I was going somewhere I really genuinely felt I might be in danger if I didn't, which, you get your mind spinning the wrong way and everything seems dangerous, but mostly, because I know that it's not just other people who are trans or who are genderqueer who might have cause to think a little, or maybe to be a little move 1 inch toward being comfortable with themselves or decent to someone else. And by and large, people are decent to me. Maybe part of that is other aspects of my life. I'm highly educated. I come across generally as well spoken. I can afford clothes that generally are, I think, relatively flattering on me. So, if you look like you have at least a little bit of money, you're eccentric in many people's minds. If you have less money, you're crazy.
Well, my question now is based on, your life and your experience as a writer and your serial stories that you're developing, what would be good advice for a listener who is sitting in your chair?
Well, I can say a couple of things. One of which is that in the broadest sense possible, being a lifetime learner is really important. I will tell you that what I learned in the course of doing a PhD, I do have a PhD, but what I learned in the course of doing that is not superior to what someone else could learn entirely on their own. It was a good opportunity for me. It worked really well for me. What's important is, for writers especially, there are things you can do and be in life that do not require much assimilation and consideration to information. But to be a good writer, you have to always be taking in new information, I think. And you have to find pleasure in research as well as writing, or at least it really helps.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing research is so easy now. I did some of my research for Autumn Harvest on the fly while I was writing chapters. I had an idea. I would look it up. I would not hesitate to go to Wikipedia first. I would then go from there to some sources and think about from a basis of knowledge how I wanted to fictionalize certain things for my fantasy world. I think that's thing that people who write speculative fiction in the broadest sense, sci-fi, fantasy, horror, paranormal romance, etc. One of the things that they sometimes fall into that's a trap, or is leads to weaker writing than they could have, is that they think that because there are fantastical or futuristic elements that they don't need to do research.
Yeah, I've been a victim of that myself with my own writing, and I've caught myself a number of times saying just because it's a fantasy world doesn't mean it can't be plausible. There's got to be a plausibility factor in there. So, maybe some research on certain subjects that are close to that might benefit you a little bit.
It never hurts. It's never going to hurt you. The most it can hurt is when you do some research and find that this thing you thought was reasonable is completely out of line.
Yeah.
And then you have to decide, am I going to do something that is totally different from everyday real life, in which case you have to figure out a way to make that a consistent part of the world, or am I going to, sacrifice some of my precious ideas and actually change? And sometimes that's what you need to do. I think that being too fixed in what you want a story to be at the end can be a bad thing as well. I kind of fall somewhere in the middle on the plotter versus pantster debate. You plot everything out, or is it all seat your pants? I really do have this whole image of the world of Autumn Harvest in my head, including its backstory, including things that are going to happen to the characters. I should have more of it written out. But one of the things that has made it harder to write that out and have a really consistent journal or Bible for that world is that the pieces do keep moving, and I like to let them slide around till they fit. So for me, somewhere in the middle, I like to have a lot of dream time for my stories, a lot of time to think about them. That works really well for me. And it means that often by the time I'm ready to write, I can just get stuff out, and that I don't spend. I know people who actually write a first draft faster than I do, much faster, but then they will need to revise it in a tear up the foundation and start over kind of way. And if that's your process and it works for you, then that's great. For me, I spend more time kind of letting my if you would compare stories to different types of bread, I've got sourdough starter in my brain, and once it rises, then I put it in the oven.
I'm telling you, it has been so much fun talking to you tonight. I cannot believe that we are 40 minutes already. And unfortunately, YouTube does not like it when I upload more than about 35 minutes. So we'll just have to do a little creative editing, no problem. But I am so thankful to have you on my show, Toph, and I hope you'll come back. I mean, we really didn't get to talk that much about Autumn Harvest Maiden, but I want for you to tell everybody where to find you.
Okay.
On the internet now.
Right. Yeah, I'm not going to give you my street address.
Yeah, exactly.
Find me on Google Street View just by knowing my middle name or something. So yeah, you can find my work online on Amazon, and the ebook of Autumn Harvest Maiden will be coming to Audible soon. It's in process.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Are you doing your own audio?
No, I have a reader. And basically, the story was serialized in audio as well as print, as text.
Fun.
And so a cleaned up audio version from Tom Krakowski, my incredible reader, will be available through Audible soon. You can also find some of my ramblings online, both at my website, which is Toph Eklund at tophecklund.net, and you can find me on Facebook and Twitter. I Twitter at Toph Eklund, and I'll give you all of the links and such, because those are much easier to click than they are to try and type out from. What was that? How was that spelled? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, fabulous. Well, I am so excited for you to come on the show, and you just got to know you're welcome anytime. Next book that comes out, or anytime you want to come back and chat, I'm right here.
It was great talking to you.
Well, thanks a lot, and I look forward to seeing you online.
Thank you for listening to this edition of Writer Groupie. For booking information, show notes, and more, visit KimSmithAuthor.com.